Hey everybody, welcome back to the Crimson Chronicles podcast. I'm Rick Morton, and we've got another great episode for you. Tommy, are tonight going to get a chance to sit down with somebody who I think might be your rival as an Alabama historian. I sort of feel like maybe the middle of the Oreo. I'm not really sure what it is, but I sort of feel like I'm squeezed between two eminent historians tonight. So I may just sit here quietly and let the two of you talk.
Well, we have tonight with us Michael Southern, and he does know more about Alabama basketball than I do, probably, although I witnessed a lot of it before he was born. But never mind that. Michael's a great guy who is a prominent basketball historian for the University of Alabama. He was a journalism major at the university, graduated in 1992. Then he went to the Gadsden Times, my hometown, and worked under Jimmy Smothers in the sports department and had a good learning curve there under Jimmy, who I've known since the 1970s. And Jimmy was a great guy, and he's missed today up there. Then he came back to Tuscaloosa 1994 through 2019 as a correspondent for the Tuscaloosa News. And during his time, he covered 4 football national championship games that Alabama was involved in. The 93 game against Miami following the 92 season, the 2010 game following the 09 season, the 2012 game following the 2011 tornado season, I call it, and then in 2013 following the 2012 season. He's covered both Alabama and Auburn athletics. He covered Michael Jordan's Birmingham Barons debut, which I'm sure is probably worth a whole nother podcast on at some point. He's covered NASCAR in Talladega. He is currently part of the Crimson crossover team and runs the Tide Hoops History account on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Bama History. And Michael, it is great to have you here. Thank you for joining us.
No, appreciate it, guys. It's an honor. So any chance we have to talk about Alabama basketball, I'm up for any time. I will talk your ears off. So I look forward to it.
Yeah. Well, let me get started. What would be your dream team? And I guess you've covered Alabama basketball now for obviously more than 30 years, but you've been a fan since you were probably a little kid, maybe back early 80s. So you've seen Alabama basketball for over 40 years. What would be your dream team from Alabama basketball history? Like, pick a starting 5 from anyone who's played for Alabama, and who would the coach be?
Well, I'm probably going to get in trouble when I say the coach, but when I talk about the 5, it's funny. I've had this, not debate, I've had this discussion with friends of mine. You know, we all have text groups. So I have a basketball text group. I've got some friends in radio media, and we've had this discussion, and we put together our all-time starting 5. But really, for me, the 5 that I put together, and I went by position. I didn't go positionless basketball like today, but I did go with. I had Leon Douglas at the 5. I had Antonio McDyess at the 4, Brandon Miller at the 3, Mark Sears at the 2, and Enos Watley at the 1. And then based on the skill set of those players, considering we have a front court of Leon Douglas, Antonio McDyess, and Brandon Miller, I would lean toward Coach Sanderson from the defensive perspective. Now, before the younger generation gets upset, if you want me to, I can sub out Antonio McDyess for Robert Ory, who now who can shoot threes, and then I could probably let Coach Oates take it over from that standpoint. And I might maybe find someone like Ernest Shelton or one more shooter to throw in there. But for me, those were the 5 that I kept coming back to last summer and all through the winter when we had these discussions. And again, think about that front court: Leon Douglas, Antonio McDyess, and Brandon Miller. Is anybody going to get a shot off against that front court? That would be pretty good.
Well, if you had an all-defensive team, I got to throw in T.R. Dunn for that back in my 70s. And then Reginald Mule King, I mean, he's got to be on your second team, but I didn't ask you for the second team.
Well, so there's the crazy thing. So you're right. We don't have the all-time leading scorer, Reginald King, on there. You don't have Derek McKee, SEC Player of the Year, on there. You don't have Herb Jones, SEC Player of the Year, SEC Defensive Player of the Year. All those guys are just waiting in the wings, which is a testimony to how many good players have come through this university and played in Coleman Coliseum, Memorial Coliseum, Foster Auditorium, a lot of good players, and people don't realize the legacy the program has had and the players that have come through for the university.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, we were talking off air before we even started tonight, and just, the younger generation, I think one of the things I'd encourage a lot of younger fans of the Tide is to go back and take a look at those teams of the 70s and 80s, because I think they probably have a hard time understanding the just embarrassment of riches that we've had in Tide basketball for all these years, just because those teams didn't necessarily get the press outside of Alabama, honestly. And yet we've got two legendary coaches. We've got enough legendary players to fill up probably a good league's worth of starting fives, and it's pretty amazing, honestly.
You know what I always found when I look back at it, the one thing that I found even more amazing, especially on that great run when Coach Newton came on board, and of course Coach Sanderson was his lead recruiter, and then when Coach Sanderson took it over and he had his run for 12 years. Go back and look at a lot of those players. The majority of those players are homegrown talent. They came from the state of Alabama. I mean, think of the volume and quality of players this state was producing in the 70s and 80s. That's a run that's just unreal as far as the talent that came through. And guess what? In the 80s, it was enough to feed two programs. You were feeding Alabama, Auburn. Of course, UAB then was going up to Memphis, but still, you were feeding Alabama and Auburn with those players in this state. And that was to me, that's the golden era as far as talent in this state, was the late 70s and most of the 80s.
Well, so I want to turn things a little bit. We're talking, we've talked about some of the greatest players in Tide history. I want you to think about who is the most underachieving team that you can remember, and then just kind of go ahead and carry that on out. Like, why do you think that team struggled?
Well, again, I'm going to get in trouble with Coach Anderson because now I'm going to pick on one of his teams. So, for me personally, that would have been the 82-83 team. Only because, think about it, when you look at the talent that was on the roster, and remember, that team got up to number 5 in the polls at one point. And that team in 82-83, remember, they beat number 10 Georgetown with Patrick Ewing. Okay, they beat number 3 Kentucky. And let's not forget the most important game. They beat number 1 UCLA, on the day of Coach Bryant's funeral in Pauley Pavilion. And then once conference play started, I've asked Coach, if he really knew, what happened, but the team kind of spiraled a little bit. They go 8-10. They did get to the championship game of the SEC tournament, lost to Georgia, and then they just get unceremoniously bounced in the NCAA tournament by Lamar, which is still an ugly, ugly mark. But you had Enos Watley, you had Mike Davis, you had Bobby Lee Hurt, you had Buck Johnson. And the victories that the team had in the non-conference, I'd really like to know what happened to that team, because it had all the potential in the world to do great things, to follow up on that great 82 season. Remember, the 82 team went to the Sweet 16, had the misfortune of running into the national champion in North Carolina. So, I really thought that 83 team was going to be one of the ones that broke through for Coach Sanderson.
Michael, I was on that trip to UCLA with the team. We talked about it on a couple of other podcasts, and it was a great team, great talent, and we had Terry Williams and Eric Richardson were the first two off the bench, that team, and you're right, it was a great team. We probably won't ask Wimp again what happened to that team. I'm sure he was
safe because we're in person.
Yeah.
Well, you know what? I thought that Georgetown victory was mighty impressive because they dominated Georgetown with Patrick Ewing in that game. I mean that team, up until mid-January, that team looked like a national championship team.
Yeah. I was looking here at the schedule, and we beat Georgetown 94-73 that year, and then of course upset UCLA.
Yeah, it would have gone out of the balloon in conference play like it did is just almost inexplicable.
I know. I know. I mean, they put together a good run at the SEC tournament like they always do because Coach did such a great job preparing for that. But then, they did lose to Georgia, and then what happens? Georgia goes to the Final Four without Dominique Wilkins. It's a year after
Yeah.
Dominique goes to the pros, and then next thing you know, Georgia's in the Final Four. I guess kind of like us last year after we lose Brandon Miller and those guys, and then they go to the Final Four. It's weird how
Yeah.
basketball works. It's so weird in that one and done situation in the NCAA tournament.
Well, during those early 80s, you were about, 10, 11, 12 years old? So, and I'm sure you were watching the games, but who knew that 40 years later you'd be the ultimate expert on Alabama basketball? But what inspired you to start the At Bama History account, or Tide Hoops History as it's known, and focusing on chronicling Alabama history?
Well, now, one thing I will say is the actual account itself, the Tide Hoops History, the At Bama History. Now, I didn't start it. That actually was still part of the Crimson Crossover team. At the time, they had started a website. They were starting with going into some spaces. Then they kind of migrated to podcasts. They started that account. They were just so busy. They really just didn't have anyone who could really devote the time they needed. And at that time, heading into the start of the 23-24 season, on my personal X account, just for fun, I started doing a daily countdown until the first tip-off. Look, you guys see it. Everybody and their brother does a football countdown. You'll see people say, hey, it's, it's Derek Thomas 55 days till kickoff. Everyone does football. Nobody does basketball. I wanted to do basketball. So I was doing that, and I was doing more than just jersey numbers. I was trying to find any way to tie a number in, whether it was like January 28th for the UCLA game. Well, that was me 28 days until tip-off, so I used that. And so anyways, Christian Sykes and those guys saw what I was doing, and then, after the season started, they kind of pinged me and said, look, would you like to run this account? Because we can't keep up with it, and we like what you did for the countdown. So, of course, I was like, heck yeah, I would love to, because believe me, you guys know this. There is a core, now, albeit it's a smaller one, but there is a core of very diehard Alabama basketball fans, and there always has been. Now, it's not like the football program where you got hundreds of thousands, but the people who do love Alabama basketball are just as passionate about that as people are for football. So I'm one of those. Believe me, I love all Alabama sports. So I'm not saying, I don't like football and I don't like baseball. I do. But I've always felt basketball has always just been overshadowed, and it deserves some attention, and it deserves some spotlight. So I jumped at the opportunity to do it, and I'm grateful for them asking me to do it. It's been a blast since then. I've had so much fun doing this, especially during the season. So it's just been wonderful to be able to share the stuff that I remember, the players, the coaches, the games, and just share that with the younger generation out there.
And Michael, obviously you're a big fan, but you're also trained as a sports writer. You're a journalism major from the university. You've worked in sports writing for a good portion of your life. How has your perspective on Alabama basketball evolved over the years as you've gone on as a sports writer?
Well, I was spoiled because when I started watching it, they were good. So I came along about 81, 82 with Enos Watley and those guys. And I was spoiled, kind of like the fans are now. They're a little bit spoiled. I took for granted that, hey, we're going to have 20-plus win seasons. We're going to win SEC tournament championships. We're going to get at least the Sweet 16. And then things kind of went to the wayside for a little bit. Coach Godfrey got him back a little bit. The interest came back with the Elite Eight run. And then we started almost a 20-year period of what I always call just mediocrity and irrelevant. And it was sad to see. I mean, for me, there's a lost generation of fans from, the mid 2000s up until about 2018. You probably have a generation of fans who think Alabama basketball's always been this bad. They're mediocre. They don't contend. They don't have any history. And so it was sad to see. I hate to say that. I'm thankful for what we have now, and I will never take it for granted again. And, everyone needs to appreciate what you're seeing now, because let me tell you, this is the best we've ever seen.
Well, Michael, can you share a few of your favorite moments or players or both from Alabama basketball history that, the fans may not be as familiar with? You've already mentioned some things that people are saying, oh, yeah, man, I remember that. But you're talking about the history and the culture of Alabama basketball. But tell us some of your favorite moments or players in the time that you've been around.
Yeah, so for me, my favorite player will always be Enos Watley. Of course, he's the first player I gravitated to when I started watching when I was about 12 years old. He was a freshman, and he was a spark plug on that team. And I was just, that was one of the things that really kickstarted. And again, people forget, there's a lot of people that never got to see Enos Watley, how great he really was, because he only played there for 2 years and he went to the pros. He was an undeniable talent. Another underrated player I really think was Buck Johnson. Buck Johnson had 4 great years at the University of Alabama. He was a first-round draft pick for the Houston Rockets, and people kind of forget about how great Buck Johnson really was. So he's one of the ones that I think about a lot too. And then as far as teams, I still always think that the 89-90 team is probably Coach Sanderson's most underrated and forgotten team. And to me, that was one of his best teams ever. I mean, to me, it rivaled the 87 team with talent. They got really poor seeding in the NCAA tournament. That team had so many great victories, and people don't even realize it. They hammered North Carolina. They beat Clemson, which went on to win the regular season ACC championship. They hammered the LSU team that had Shaquille O'Neal, Stanley Roberts, and Chris Jackson. All right. So then they win the SEC tournament. They go out west. They just crush number 2 Arizona. Right. And then of course we have the misfortune to run into Loyola. But I say to this, from a talent standpoint, I think that 90 team may have been Coach Sanderson's one of his best. And if you put that team in any other region beside the West, because that West also had UNLV, I think they get to the Final Four. Because if I remember correctly, your other Final Four teams were like Georgia Tech, Arkansas, and I was trying to remember who the fourth, but I think Alabama beats any of those other teams in those other regions. They were so good. Remember, David Benoit, forgotten and underrated, had a long pro career with the Utah Jazz. David Benoit at center. We already know how good Robert Horry was. Melvin Cheatham, like Buck Johnson, a great 4-year career people forget about. He became an all-SEC player. You had James Sanders, a walk-on at the 2 guard. And then, of course, Gary Waits. Gary Waits seemed quiet, but he was tough as nails. I mean, he was tough as nails. People may not realize that, but behind the scenes, he was mean and he was tough. So that was a great team in 89-90.
Yeah, you had Keith Askins and Marcus Webb coming off the bench, which are about as opposite players as you could possibly have.
But I love that 89-90 team too.
Yeah.
I mean, the 86-87 team is my favorite team of all time, but that 89-90 team's right up there.
Yeah,
well, we may have.
In my position as ticket manager, I went to Oakland or the San Francisco area for that Loyola game. And we asked Coach Sanderson about that game. And, he says he regrets playing them like we did. But I thought, it was about as close of a game as Loyola ever had that year. And certainly they had usually scored 60-something points by halftime, the Loyola. And, of course, we had the Hank Gathers and Bo Kimball and all that drama going on and the death of Hank Gathers. And it was quite an emotional game. It was an unbelievable setting for Alabama basketball.
I think that that Loyola team, the round before, they scored 149 on Michigan. I don't think Alabama really wanted to try to, even though Alabama had the horses, I mean, I don't disagree with the way that Coach Sanderson played it. Remember, Loyola, I think they scored like over 100 points in like 28 out of the 30-something games. They were unreal that year. It was just crazy. And again, Michigan tried to run with them, and you saw what happened to them. So, I mean, they got ran out of the gym. It was embarrassing.
Yeah.
Well, Michael, you've kind of given us, I think, a little bit of a hint into the next question, but I'm gonna ask you maybe a little different way. But as far as looking at eras of Alabama basketball, as a historian, as a researcher, it's kind of like your kids. You want to love them all, but you don't want to show any preference, but maybe it's kind of hard not to. What would be your favorite era? And what I really kind of want you to press into a little bit is, what are maybe some of those things that you found out along the way, just as you've talked to people and researched and kind of gone down the rabbit hole? Because we all have a tendency to do that when we get into, topics that really drive us. What are maybe some of the things that you found about those teams in that era of Alabama basketball that would be, things that folks would not know?
So, my favorite era personally, of course, is going to be the 80s, because that's what I grew up on. I mean, look, you guys know this. When you're about 7 years old, between 7 and 16, those are your formative years. And you don't ever forget those memories. I mean, they're there forever. They're embedded. We're going to be 95 years old if we live that long, if we're fortunate. We're going to remember all that stuff from that part of our lives. And for me, that whole era between 82 all the way up to about 91, 92, to me is one of my favorite eras that I'll never forget. But you brought up a good question as far as what I found fascinating. So, when I was doing the daily countdown for basketball before the 24 season, yeah, I was having to dig through some research because, anything from 81, 82 up, I'm pretty good. I can just, recall it from here most of the time. But, I really wanted to dig deeper because I wasn't familiar with the 76 team. I heard the stories. But then, I had heard of the Rocket 8, but I didn't know the Rocket 8. So I really dug deep and got to learn about the Rocket 8 and Johnny D. And that was a fascinating story about that team with that. I have a lot of respect for Coach D and what that team did. I mean, they went 14-0 in the SEC in 56. They were 21-3. They were ranked number 5. You had 5 players that Coach D brought with him from Notre Dame that had tried out for Notre Dame, didn't make the team. And then like a month later, he gets hired at Alabama. He calls up these 5 guys and said, "Hey, you want to come with me down south?" And they all came. Yeah. I mean, look, you're talking about Jerry Harper, George Lynn, Leon Marlaire, who just passed away, unfortunately, Dennis O'Shea, Dick Gunder, all those guys came with him. And then 4 years later, you see what they did. Now, look, we all know the technicality. They couldn't play in the NCAA tournament because they had the stupid rule that players could only play 3 years. And, of course, Coach D played them as freshmen. So they played in the regular season, but if they had gone to the tournament, they would have been ruled ineligible. So, I always sit there and look at it. Look, Jerry Harper averaged over 20 and 20. He averaged like 23 points and 21 rebounds. I mean, that's Mr. 2020. That's crazy. That's 33 rebounds in one game. So, I believe San Francisco won the national championship that year with someone named Bill Russell. So I would have loved to have seen if Alabama would have at least got a shot. I'm not saying they beat San Francisco, but that sure would have been interesting to see Jerry Harper and those guys banging against Bill Russell in the NCAA tournament.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. You talk about the 80s, and I was honored to have served as ticket manager from 87 to 93. Stayed on as director of Tide Pride for 13 more years, and then did Crimson Tide Foundation and the A Club and the Red Elephant Clubs and a variety of things. But my favorite time, as stressful as it was when I was ticket manager. And because of the start of football Tide Pride, about did me in. But in the late 80s, when Steve Sloan was athletic director, Tommy Limbaugh was his right-hand man, and we started marketing Wimp Sanderson. And we had Wimp nights and plaid nights and called it the Plaid Palace and had the parquet floor. And we sold out in that 80, 89, 90 season. We sold out every SEC game. And it was an atmosphere like I've rarely seen since. Now, we've had some great teams, since then. I mean, that's been, 36 years or so ago. But what do you remember about the late 80s? And, Wimp wearing the plaid jacket kind of started it all. And we had Wimp night, and I remember using the masks and everything. I mean, the student section was crazy. And I guess you were probably a freshman then, right? During that 89, 90. So tell us about that. What do you remember about that?
So, first of all, kudos to you for the promotion that you put together. So, yes, you had a very marketable asset with Coach Sanderson. Look, the jacket is memorable. The scowl is memorable. So you had 2 perfect things that you could put together. Sometimes the antics on the side, on the court, gets people all fired up. Look, that string that you talked about when you had all those sellouts, I went to as many games as I could on that one, and we had a blast. That was a fun environment. You had over 15,000 people. And I really think that 20-year period where the program kind of suffered, I mean, that's where we lost the excitement and enthusiasm. Because I tell you, Tommy, when I was going to those games, everybody was standing up and everybody was screaming, and it was loud. I mean, granted, Coleman doesn't have the best acoustics in the world, so if you're not making a lot of noise, you lose everything in there because the ceiling is so high the way it's shaped. But I remember those environments. I remember LSU games. I remember Tennessee games, Kentucky games. They were fun. And then it takes a lot now to see the crowds get up to that level. I don't know. It's because Now there's people my generation or older. It's hard for them to really scream and get up now. For the ones that are in the seats, I don't know. Students still do their part. So,
Watch it.
so, and that's what I'm talking about the lost generation. We lost 15 years of fans who are younger than us that, just aren't attached to Alabama basketball because we were so mediocre. So again, I see a dichotomy. You see people our age who love it and have loved it forever. And then you see the younger generation, but we're missing the middle class, if that makes any sense as far as fans are concerned.
And I'm amazed that even Nate Oates is wearing plaid jackets in honor
Oh, I
of
love
Will.
it. I love
Isn't
it.
that great? Yeah.
So here's what I want to see. For these last couple of years, they do the crimson out, they do the white out, they do all that. When are we going to have plaid out? I want a
Amen.
plaid night. I mean,
Absolutely.
I have look. Greg Burns gets tweeted at all the time, so he's not looking at that. But I have tweeted several times there in the Athletics saying, "Can we please have a plaid out night next year? Please, let's make sure you have coach invited, and let's have a plaid out.
That's right.
Everyone wear plaid jackets." So
That's
I would
right.
much rather do that than a crimson out. We always lose when it's a crimson out. I don't know why. I don't
Well,
like
you
that.
can guarantee that if you keep tweeting at Greg Byrne, that there are going to at least be 2 people in the world that are going to continue to share it. And you're looking at
all
them,
right, all right. But I would love for us to have at least once a season a plaid out night. Because look, to me, and you guys tell me if I'm wrong. To me, plaid is synonymous with Alabama basketball, like houndstooth is to Alabama football. That's what I know. If I
That's
see
right.
houndstooth, I think football. If I see plaid, I think basketball.
Michael, I just have to reach over and grab my phone, and it's kind of with the
there you
lighting
go.
here in the studio. But
I see that.
But I'm telling you, I've always carried a plaid phone, and it's because of those days, and and I think we need to celebrate that.
Absolutely, we should. Look, when I was going back then, and Tommy, you were running those promotions. The students were wearing plaid jackets. It was a thing. Look, the president of Crimson Chaos receives a plaid jacket every year. That's what they hand over to each successor. So again, the tradition is there. So I don't know why we're not leaning into it and fully embracing it.
Well, thinking about some of those details that are maybe a little more obscure than the plaid jacket. One of the things, Michael, I'm interested in is I think every historian sort of has a little bit of a bag of tricks or a little bit of a go-to pattern for the way that you seek out obscure details, and so. With some of the things that you post on Twitter, some of the things that we've seen you talk about in your own podcast, how do you approach uncovering and verifying details? And then is there any story that you've pursued, that has been really particularly challenging in trying to uncover the details and really sort out to get to the story?
Well, as far as finding the details for some of the older stuff, anything that's usually about late 90s or above, you can, if you dig long enough, you can find something. You can find more details. You can find media, pictures, video of it. But then, a lot of the stuff that I remember, it's hard finding a lot of the stuff from the 70s and 80s from that standpoint. And the first thing you start with is you go to the media guys, their website, just to find a score and a date. And then after that, I'm sifting through trying to find details that for some of these games that I never saw or not familiar with. As far as putting some things together, last year before the start of the season, we put together just for fun. We asked our followers on there, basically rank your greatest Alabama team, your 10 teams, and your greatest Alabama players. And again, to us, greatest is subjective. It doesn't mean it can mean different things to different people. If I say who are the greatest Alabama players, you may think it's the most accomplished, and you may think it's the most talented, and you may think it's the longevity. So, I was really curious to see what the feedback would be when we did that. So it was very interesting to see. Of course, there's some recency bias on there. Of course, our followers skew a little younger. I look at the metrics on X because we do see that. We do have a decent amount our age, but there is a few more for the younger side. But again, we had a shootout going on with the voting between Brandon Miller and Reggie King. They were back and forth up into the deadline, who we perceived as the greatest Alabama basketball player. So I was kind of glad to see that. Reggie King was getting a lot of, and literally every day when I was adding it up, it was literally going back and forth for about a 5-day period. It would be Reggie King, Brandon Miller, Reggie King. Reggie King, Brandon Miller. So I was actually glad to see that. Same thing on the teams too. So obviously, the 23 and 24 teams were rated very high, but 76 and 87 and even 56, the Rocket 8, all got a lot of respect. So I was glad to see that. So made me feel that maybe some of the stuff that I had tweeted out didn't just go out into the ether and no one saw it. So I was glad to see that that got some recognition, and some of those players and teams people are now familiar with because they deserve it, because they laid the foundation for what's being done now and been taken to the next level.
Yeah. Michael, you've mentioned several classic matchups. We talked about Alabama UCLA and Pauley Pavilion, Alabama Georgetown, but we've had a lot of those type matchups through the year. What are some of the most memorable games in program history, in your opinion?
So we already touched, to me, we already touched on the biggest non-conference win, which was the UCLA win. I will still say, as far as non-conference, beating number one UCLA, there at Pauley Pavilion, again, simply because of the emotional circumstances involved with the passing of Coach Bryant. I mean, he had died 2 days earlier. The team didn't know if they were going to go out there. Coach Sanderson talked to, Paul Bryant Jr., and he said, I think my dad would want you to play. So they go out there. I mean, the team literally watches the funeral procession, like 4 hours before tip off, and then they got to go out there and play. So, I mean, that game will always stand out to me as the biggest non-conference game that Alabama's ever won. Also, for me, the SEC Tournament Championship in '82, the 48-46 game where Eddie Phillips has the putback and Alabama wins the tournament in Rupp Arena. Back when the schools used to host the SEC tournament to make it even more unfair. So Alabama goes in there and wins. I mean, that's pretty amazing. I mean, here's another one that people don't realize from the Rocket 8. Remember that Rocket 8 team hung 101 points on Kentucky, became the first team to score over 100 points on Kentucky with Johnny D in that team. And I think that game was in Montgomery, not in Tuscaloosa. But again, that's pretty significant when you're the first program to score 100 points on Kentucky. And then I've got my own personal one, and this is more recent. But for me, the SEC Tournament Championship in 2021, when Alabama beat LSU 80-79. Remember the circumstances. It's a COVID season. Were they even going to play? You have all these, restrictions on the crowds. One of the things that I hate, that really upsets me about that 21 season is, by golly, that team deserved sellout crowds, and they didn't get it. They didn't get it because that's the team that signaled to everybody Alabama basketball was back. We didn't realize it, but that's the one. Look, when they won the SEC Tournament Championship in Nashville, I was there with my daughter. I hadn't seen that happen in 30 years. That's the second time I had cried for Alabama basketball. I cried in '87 when we lost to Providence, and I was literally there just when the buzzer sounded. I was just bawling like crazy because it just hit me that I haven't seen this in 30 years, and I never thought that would be the case. I got so used to seeing Alabama win the tournament. So that one hit me like a ton of bricks. That was a really big game for me that they were able to do that. They swept the regular season and the tournament title. So I have a special love for that 2021 team for what they did, bringing the program back from the abyss.
Michael, I think one of the things that is part of the era that we're living in today is social media has completely transformed the way that we consume information, the way that we understand the world. Talk a little bit about, especially for folks that may not be familiar with, with your X account, what role do you think today social media plays in preserving the history of Alabama sports in general, especially for folks that are passionate fans?
Well, so, you guys know this, the younger generation, I mean, social media, look, Instagram, X, maybe not so much Facebook because that's looked upon as the old social media now, but TikTok, things like that. Yeah, I know. Hey, I'm on Facebook. I'm right there with you. So TikTok, Instagram, X, those things I mentioned. You know what those are, guys? That's, to us, that's USA Today, that's the Tuscaloosa News, that's the Birmingham News, that's Sports Illustrated. All right, that's their media consumption today. versus what we consumed when we were growing up. That's the legacy media we grew up on. We consumed that. We read that. We waited for the issues. I waited every week for the new Sports Illustrated to come. I read the newspapers every day. Again, it's just a different way to consume it, but that's the vessel. That's how you have to do it now. And look, we already know this. Attention spans are even shorter than before. So if you don't hit them with something good right off the bat, I'm just going to scroll on to the next thing. What's next? What's next? What's next? Oh, what is this video? Is that a funny dog video? What is this? So, you can't bury the lead anymore for sure. You better hit them with something important. You better give them something they want to see or something they want to read quick. Now, I will say this. In the era that we all see the demise, well, not demise, but the lessening of the impact that the legacy media has, which part of me hates to see. I hate to see circulations down. I hate people not buying newspapers or buying magazines, things like that. But I will say this, social media gives a chance, and you guys are proof of this. If you're passionate about anything or something, whether it be sports, entertainment, whatever, you have a platform to go out there and find other people with like minds that you can discuss it with or share it with.
That's right.
Okay. And to me, you didn't have that when we were growing up. If you wanted to write about Alabama sports, you had to go to school, get a journalism degree or a broadcasting degree, pay your dues, covering, high school sports or doing weekend or overnight on radio and work your way up to find your platform. You don't have to do that now. If you're passionate about it and you're authentic, you can make it grow organically. You can jump on, you can do a YouTube channel, you can do a podcast, you can do TikTok videos, you can send out posts. So on that aspect, I really appreciate that because it gives an avenue for more people. And in this era, it's like anything else. I mean, people are going to gravitate to what they're interested in. So that's a good thing too. So, you have different things that you can choose and different things that you can listen to and watch. And that's the good side. Now, again, the downside is we already know that Sports Illustrated, like all the Sports Illustrateds you have behind you, Tommy, yeah, they don't have the impact they used to, which is somewhat sad because I'm like you. I collect all the Sports Illustrated with the Alabama covers.
But Michael, one of the things that you said is, I think it's the intersection between, yes, it's legacy media, but it also is the water cooler, and so those community conversations, those conversations we still have when we're hanging out with our friends, and you're with that group of work buddies or neighborhood friends or whatever, where we're talking about players, scores, stats, all those kind of things. That all happens. One of the things I really would want to encourage, and I just kind of want to say this because I think, so much of our audience are folks that are more, there are a lot of folks that are our age, a lot of folks that are kind of in the next demographic a little bit younger than us, and in their mid to late 40s. We need to participate in the conversations about the stuff that we're passionate about. And I think something Tommy and I are really passionate about in this channel and what we're trying to do with Crimson Chronicles is we don't want to just tell these stories. We want to create community around people talking about this stuff and chopping it up and analyzing it, remembering and, talking about their lives around it and all that. And I think something happens among younger folks naturally on social media. I think for us, sometimes it doesn't. Facebook is probably the place where it does happen. But I think for us to, really promote Tide Athletics history and to try to get the younger generation to reach back a little bit and understand the heritage that's a part of the university that they love and that they cheer for, is us getting in the mix and participating in those conversations. And I love the fact that, that through your X account, you do that. And you're not just putting things up daily, but you're also there and you're interacting. And I mean, that's how you and I met. First thing was just by carrying on conversations in that forum. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit of a rant, but I wanted to get that in this interview because I think that is such an important thing that maybe some of us that are in our 50s and 60s and 70s that are really passionate about this, we're not active in the place where some of the conversations are going on.
Well, so you bring up a good point, and one of the things, last year, as I really started working with the X account, I really was thinking about what are we trying to do here? What do I want to do other than just promote Alabama basketball? So one of the things that I was really pushing hard last year is, I encouraged follower participation. And
Mm-hmm.
some of the best things that we published last year were people sharing their favorite player, their favorite game. Hey, I was 10 years old and my dad took me to the first Alabama-Auburn game, and I remember this. And I can tell you, when Alabama went to the Final Four, one of the funnest things I did all year, the last year, was I asked, people to give me, what does this mean to you that Alabama got to the Final Four? How long have you been waiting? What did this mean to you? We got
Mm-hmm.
so many submissions. We published every single one of them, and I was
Mm-hmm.
crying almost on some of the ones I was reading because it was a shared emotion. Look, we all know it. It's a little self-gratifying to know that there are other people who are as passionate about something as you are, and you have a shared history, a shared perspective. Some of the stories I got from people who's like, I waited my whole life. I can't believe this has happened. And, my dad or my mom, we went to all these games and I thought we'd never do
Mm-hmm.
this. That was some of the best stuff that I enjoyed reading and publishing. That's what I encourage. It's more fun when the followers send us stuff. They want to send a favorite game or a memory or something like that. We love doing that. That's great. That's what makes it fun.
Michael, staying on the social media subject, I know our sports information or athletic communications office through the years has had a hard time distinguishing of what a media is. And
It's new now. It's totally different now.
so, as we talked about off camera earlier about the traditional Birmingham News, Tuscaloosa News, Gadsden Times, Birmingham Post Herald, I mean, it was pretty cut and dry. Who would get press passes? Bama Magazine with Kirk McNair, but with the advent of social media and all the blogs that people have, it's been difficult for them to distinguish who's legit and who's not. Have you experienced any of that, a pro or con, or I don't want to throw you under the bus or make you throw anybody else under the bus, but is that an issue out there today still?
Well, because social media gives so many platforms for people to spout whatever they want. You're right. Things get blurred quite a bit, and you got to sift through a lot of sometimes garbage to get to the good stuff. In my position like this, I don't consider myself a media member anymore. I'm just a
Mm-hmm.
fanboy out there talking about Alabama basketball. So look, I buy my season tickets. I go to the games. I'll, request Tide Pod tickets. Hopefully they won't reject me anymore if I say anything bad about them. You know, so I'm going straight as a fanboy. I have no misconceptions of hey, I want media credentials. I'm going as a fan. I'm presenting it as a fan with the passion of a fan. And I'm not objective. I did that for
Word.
30 years and sit in the press box. No cheerleading. You will be escorted out, all that stuff. I can tell you it's liberating and it's more fun because there is no restraints. I can promote and say whatever I want and help the program any way that I know how, because that's what I would like to do. So
Love it.
I find it liberating and refreshing, and I enjoy it. Yes, there's still a lot of garbage people put out there, and people do things intentionally to try to degrade or tear down
Mm-hmm.
things. That's not what we're doing. But I really enjoy. I really thought after COVID, when I stepped away from the Tuscaloosa News, when COVID happened and they kind of pulled back on all this stuff, I thought in my mind I was really going to miss it, but I haven't. I really haven't. I really enjoyed just being a fan like I was when I was 12 years old. And I've appreciated, look, I've been going to the basketball games again since 2013 with season tickets already. But these last couple of years, I've really been engaged now with the things that I get to do. And again, I don't want to sit on media row. And besides, in a couple more years, Media Row will be in the upper rafters anyway, so it won't matter. My seats are better. My seats are much better. So I'm happy where
Yeah.
my seats are in Coleman. So I anticipate pretty soon, they'll follow suit like every place else, and the media will be banished up to the upper rafters of every facility because you know this, Tommy. That's valuable premium seating you can charge now.
That's right.
So, yes, I mean, look, Chris Box and Brian Denny, you're relegated to the corner, and those are what the founder suites now. So there you go.
Yes.
You got Champions
Yes.
Club and all that stuff there. So same in basketball. If we don't build a new arena, I fully expect in the next year or two, the media might be getting kicked out somewhere and putting either students or somebody else in that section.
Okay, well, getting off our social media soapbox here.
That was fun, though. That was a fun discussion.
Okay, back to the history. Are there any unsung heroes in Alabama's basketball's past who you believe deserve more recognition? You may have touched on some of this, but who deserves more recognition? I know you mentioned Buck Johnson, maybe Melvin Cheatham, and a couple more, but who are some more players that probably didn't get the credit due?
Okay, I'm gonna really blow your mind. I'm gonna go way back here in the Wayback Machine, but we already talked about Jerry Harper. So by first and foremost, him, Mr. 2020, he deserves it. And then I'm not sure how many people realize that Mike Norholtz has that 50-point game, still holds that record from 1966. I mean,
Well,
think about
we had
that.
Mike on. We had Mike on.
Yeah,
It
no,
was
Mike's
great.
great.
He was super. Yeah.
And then let's not forget, let's go all the way back to Alabama's first All-American and James Lindy Hood in that 29-30 team with Coach Crisp that went 20-0. Let's go ahead and hang the banner and take that retroactive national championship that the Primo Peretta poll has given us. So I want to hang the banner. Let's just go ahead and do it. We've got some football national championships I'm not going to dispute, so let's just go ahead and hang the banner for the basketball team in 1929, 1930. But I think those three players, again, those are the type players that I didn't know anything about until I started doing research. And when I came across all that, I mean, it was like uncovering it was like a great book. I was just hooked. I was sitting there researching and reading as much as I could. And those players and some of those teams were great teams, great players in their era, and deserve more recognition now. Look, I'm not going to take too much of a swipe at the Bryant Museum. I appreciate them having the basketball exhibit now, but they didn't recognize Johnny D in there as far as like the SEC championship coaches. So I was wondering why they didn't have the Rocket 8 and Johnny D in there. That was the only thing that surprised me when I went and looked at the exhibit last year.
Wow. Well, yeah, Michael, and I think you've kind of touched on this, but, thinking about just the culture of Alabama basketball, fan engagement, the way that that's kind of has evolved over the decades, maybe here's what I want to ask this a different way. What would be some of the things that you would want to maybe cherry pick from each of the decades and say, hey, here's something about the culture of Alabama basketball in each of the decades you've experienced that you'd like to make sure are part of our culture today?
Well, I already touched upon like the older generation that we need more recognition for that so they can understand that, look, the program's like what, 112 years old? There's a lot of history that goes back even in the 1920s and 30s with Coach Crisp. From a marketing standpoint, we already talked about, I want the plaid out night. So I want that to be an annual tradition, by the way. I mean, I'm not going to give up on that one. As I told you, Coach Sanders is my coach. He will always be my coach. And that's my Alabama basketball coach that I grew up on. And again, I'm going to do our part, or at least what I can do, to keep trying to educate the younger generation on all the great players that have come before them. Look, there's no denying that we are at the height of Alabama basketball. What this program has achieved, in the last 5 years is unprecedented, and no one will dispute that, and I'm enjoying every minute of it. But let's not overlook the fact of what came before you, because there's a lot of good there. I'm not trying to take a swipe at the athletic department or the promotions department, but Tommy, we need a few more, plaid and parquet promotion type things that last the whole season, and let's sustain it and do a good job about promoting it. I mean, there was a game earlier this year where they were honoring like the 76 team, and I didn't even know anything about it. And they brought out, I don't remember any promotion for that. And that's a shame because you had Leon Douglas and those guys. They deserve a lot of promotion so people can understand what they did and really how great that 76 team was. My goodness. If the NCAA tournament would have actually seeded teams in 76, Alabama and Indiana don't play at least till the Final Four, maybe the championship game, because that 76 team was a powerhouse. My goodness, that team was so good.
All right. You are a workaholic about Alabama
I don't know
basketball.
about that. Well, okay. Maybe for that.
Okay, so you've got to have some things in your mind that you still want to do with Crimson Crossover, at Bama History, the Tide Hoops History platform. What's in store for us true basketball fans?
Well,
from you?
so So I really enjoyed the summer podcast series that we did last year with the 10 people or 10 interviews that we got. I really want to make sure that we do that again this summer. There's so many players that I want to reach out to try to do podcasts with, or coaches or things like that, even media members. So anybody who wants to talk about Alabama basketball tradition. So definitely want to resume that this summer. Look, I want to be a part and chronicle this current run. Let's see how far we can go. Got a big game tomorrow night. The game tomorrow night worries me more than if we were to play Duke after that if they win, because to me, Alabama is always the most vulnerable the first game of the weekend of the tournament. They have the most time to prepare. We get past that first game, I feel better about the second game because you only have 24 hours. So the biggest thing is I really want to keep pushing for more interaction from our followers. So right now we have a follower who just out of the blue sent something to me on a DM, and it was great. It was just him writing about what this means, this tournament run would mean to him, how far they would go. And I asked him, I said, can I publish this? And he was like, do you want to? And I was like, heck yeah. I said, this is your message to the team. Let me publish it. So he said, sure. So we did that for the first game. And then I said, give me another one. So he gave me another one. And I just got his one for tomorrow. So we're going to publish that tomorrow morning too. So he's committed. He's going to give me something as far as this team goes. Those are the things, because those are the things that people remember. Those are the things people share. It's a common experience. There's like, I know what he's saying. I feel the same way. I love this. So again, let's hope this season goes as deep as we hope it can, and we'll have all kinds of more follower interaction. We really promote that. So between the follower interaction, memories, stories, podcasts, those are probably the things that we'll have on deck at least through the summer. Last year I did a Robert Horry series, when the NBA playoffs were coming up, so highlighted all his big shots and all of the NBA championships. Don't forget, got a pretty good NBA history. And there was a period, when Alabama had the most NBA players from a school at one point there in the 90s. So a lot of great players have come through here, with a lot of great coaching have come through here. And look, Coach Oates and the staff are doing a great job too. So appreciate everything they've done to bring this program back from the dead and now take it to a level that we never thought. Well, I wouldn't say we never thought we'd never get there, but we were getting concerned. How about that? I mean, I'll tell you guys, this. I thought for sure we were just cursed and we were never going to get to the Final Four, but lo and behold, we've done it now. So guess what? What's the last thing we got to do? Let's just go ahead and win the whole dadgum thing. That's the last barrier we have to break.
That's it.
All right, Rick, close us out.
Man, Michael Southern, thanks for a great conversation, man. We've really enjoyed spending some time with you during this episode, and we want to make sure that folks remember that they can check you out at Crimson Crossover. You got another summer series that's going to be coming up here in a couple of months, and so we want to make sure to tune in and be part of the ride with that, and that folks continue to reach out and find you at Bama History on X, or for those old guys like us on Twitter, that's where you'll find it.
Oh,
or the tweeter if you happen to be really old,
Yeah, this has been a blast. I appreciate this, and you can tell I'll talk about this as long as you want to. This is fun stuff.
Absolutely. Well, we'll do it again. There's hopefully there's going to be a lot more history being made.
Absolutely.
Maybe even here in the next several weeks. And so maybe we'll have something to come back and talk about and celebrate here pretty soon. Michael, we try to end every one of these episodes the same way. We want to just wish our followers and along with everybody a hearty Roll Tide. So Roll Tide, my brother.
Roll Tide.
Roll Tide. Thank you, Michael.
All right. Thank you, guys.